So today's video is going to be about how I use the Boolean modifier with a collection of objects in order to create those odd-shaped holes in that paint bottle rack that I created in the last video. All right, so here's the diagram of the shape of the hole. We're going to use three shapes. We're going to use two cylinders and a cube. All right, so let's open up Blender and I'll show you how I created these holes. Okay, so I have Blender open with the rack that I created in the last video. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put those holes in this back panel here. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is I'm going to go to this scene collection up here, highlight that, and I'm gonna add a new collection because everything that I'm going to do with these new holes, I'm gonna add to this new collection, okay? And we can rename it and just call it holes. Okay, so I'm gonna hide this rack because we really don't need to see this at the moment. So I'm gonna just hide it at the collection level. So we just, this little eyeball at the collection, just select that and it will go away. All right, so we're gonna add our objects first. So three objects. We're gonna add a cylinder. So we're gonna Shift A, brings up our add menu, mesh, and we're going to add a cylinder. All right, so let's make this little, zoom in here a little bit. All right, that's a little better. All right, so down in the left-hand corner, anytime you add a object in Blender, you're gonna get this little dialog box, I guess, that comes up, where we can set a couple of things right away. So I'm gonna set the radius of this cylinder to 2.5, right? Because that's what we had in that diagram. The depth, since the thickness of the wall of the rack is 2.5, I'm just gonna double this and we'll make this 5. Okay, so that's the small cylinder. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rename this to small cylinder because we're gonna use two holes. So I just wanna be able to distinguish these items. So over here on the right where it's a cylinder, I'm just gonna double click that and type in small hole. All right, I'm gonna hide this as well. And now I'm gonna create the large hole. Shift A again, mesh, cylinder. Same box comes up. Everything is good here, except I'm going to make this one 4.5 as the radius, okay? And now I'm gonna rename that to large hole. And I'm gonna hide that. Okay, one more object, Shift A again. This time I'm gonna add a cube. All right, so the default is 2 millimeters. I want it to be the thickness of the small cylinder. So we're gonna make that, so we'll make the size of this 5 millimeters, okay? Okay, so go over to your information window. If it's not open, just press N on your keyboard and it'll come up. In the dimensions on the y-axis, I'm going to type in 9. All right, and what this does is it will make that 9 millimeters along the y-axis. So let's hide that and bring up the large hole. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to move the objects to actually form the actual hole. All right, so there's the large hole. Let's turn on. So we know that the length of this cube and the large hole is the same. It's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this edge to the center of this hole. So in order to move something in an object in Blender, hit G. It stands for grab, that you can now move it. I'm going to constrain it along the Y by hitting Y and type in 4.5. Okay. And now it is 4.5 millimeters past there. All right, so now what we're going to do is let's hide this large hole and unhide the small one. Now you can see this matches really well, but we're just going to turn around and move this to the other side of the cube. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to hit G, Y, and we know the length of the cube now is 9 millimeters, so I'm gonna just type in 9. Okay, and now let's bring back the large hole. And now you can see we have the shape of that hole that we're going to use. Let's bring back our rack for a second. And all right, so we can see that the shape is laying horizontal. So we need to rotate this so it stands up vertically. So let's hide the rack again. Let's select everything. And I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees along the x-axis. So what I'm going to do is hit R for rotation, X to constrain the rotation along the X, and type in 90. Okay, so now it's standing up vertically. Let's bring back our rack. Cool, that looks a lot better. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the object that we're going to use for the hole and place it where I'm going to make the hole in that back wall. So in order to move that, I'm going to keep everything selected, and the measurements I'm going to use, so I'm going to use the G command again. So G, we'll go along the Y first. We're going to need to go 47.25. Obviously I did the measurements prior, but what this is going to do is the center of this object is now on the center of that back wall. Okay, let's move it over to the X. So we're going to hit G, X, and I'm going to type in 40. This way it is 40 millimeters from the edge. And now what I want to do is I want to move it up to its position. So we're going to go G, Z, 32. Okay. So that's where the placement of the hole that's going to be on the left is going to be. And you can see, if we look at it a bit more closely, let's come in, you can see it protruding at the back as well as the front. All right, so what I'm going to do is, let's zoom back out here for a second. So I'm going to duplicate this object and move it over to the other side of the rack so I can make both holes at the same time. So in order to duplicate an object in Blender, we hit Shift D. Now notice that the object is highlighted in white, and now I can move this anywhere I want. So I'm going to constrain it along the x-axis and use precise measurements to place it where I want. So I'm going to hit X to constrain it along the X, and then I'm going to type in 110. And that moves it 110 millimeters to the other side. Essentially, it's 40 millimeters from both ends. All right, so now we have the objects that we're going to use for both of our holes. Okay, so we're going to look at the Boolean modifier. I like modifiers because they're a non-destructive way to manipulate a mesh. So let's go into this project and I'll show you what can be done with this particular modifier. Okay, so I have a simple little project with 2 cubes here to demonstrate what the modifier can do. All right, so the top cube I'm calling the source. So I renamed them both. The top one is the source, the bottom one is the target. Okay, so the Boolean modifier requires 2 objects. The source object is what we're going to apply the modifier to. So this is the one that we're going to modify. The target object is what we're going to use to modify the original source object. Okay? All right, so let's go to modifiers. So go down this right-hand side on these particular tabs, find the one that looks like a wrench, and that's the modifiers property. Select that. All right, so we're going to add a modifier. So we're going to select modifier, and depending on what version of Blender you're using, this might look a little different, but just look for Boolean. So here's that, and select that. All right, so there's 2 ways that we can select the target object. One is just by coming down here, and you'll see all the objects in your project being listed here. So that's one way. The other way is to take this little eyedropper. So if you had a lot of objects, this is a great option. And just select that. Now we can just kind of hover over the target object and select it. And now it has selected it in the object. Okay. All right, so fast and exact, it's just the way the math is applied. So for this simple scenario, I wouldn't worry about it. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go from the left and work our way to the right. So intersect. All right, notice when I selected intersect, the top object went away. And now it created this funny shaded area here. Now remember, the target object is really not what we're manipulating here. So if we hide that and now highlight the source, where those two objects intersected, where they're combined, that's what we're left with. So that's what the intersect item does. So now if we select union, notice the highlight is around all the objects. So both of these objects. So it's combining them all together. So now this source object, if we applied this modifier, would be the combination of these two. Where intersect, it's really where just the two of them intersect, and that would be the new object. Okay? So where they intersect, the union of them together, and the difference is where they intersect, we're going to remove the target from the source. Okay, so where that target object is, we're going to subtract that from the modified object. So those are the three operations that we can do with this. Okay, so we're back in our main project. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the rack as our source and these holes as our target. All right, so let's go over to our modifiers. I'm going to add a modifier. I'm going to add the Boolean, and we're going to use the difference. But in this case, we don't want to use just an object. I want to do the whole operation with just one modifier. So I don't really want to have to go in and create 6 modifiers. So Blender gives us a great way in order to do that. So this operand type, if we pull this drop-down list, so now there's an item here called collection. And this is why I put all those items into the collection. So now it's going to treat the collection as one object. And we can see the list of our collections. I'm going to select the holes. And now you can see those holes are now highlighted in orange. And if I hide that holes collection, you can now see it's created those holes. And I can now take this object and export it as an STL file and print it, and these holes will be created. All right, so that's how I created these holes. I really like the non-destructive nature of the modifiers so that I can tweak and manipulate them later if I didn't get things exactly right. So in our example, so let's show you this. So say I didn't realize that the screw heads that I was using to attach this, maybe they were a little bit bigger. So let's just kind of just resize this and just do this one. All right, so I can highlight the large cylinder here, and maybe I make this instead of 9 millimeters, maybe it's 12 millimeters. Right? So now you can see it's larger. So if I now hide that, you can see that that large hole now is bigger than the one that we had before. And I can now export this and reprint it. Okay, so remember, you have 3 operations that you can perform with the Boolean modifier. Intersect, union, and difference. And where you can use the target as a single object as well as a collection of objects. So I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you in the next one.